call to order the second meeting of the Citizens Commission on Elected Officials' Compensation. For the record, let's identify all who are present in the room, starting with myself, Chet Christie. I'm privileged to serve as the chair. I'd ask each of the commission members to, again, introduce themselves, and then likewise have all the staff who are present to do so. Commission Member Easterday.
Kristen Easterday.
Dawn Tyler Lee.
Marshall Moore.
William Murdoch.
Standing. Now, staff persons who are present.
Josh Cox.
Ken Paul.
Rory McGinnis.
Greg Bieberson.
Nicole Brandon.
Very good. Director Brandon, we didn't have you the last time, so if you don't mind, take just a brief second or two and share with us who you are.
Okay, I apologize for missing the first meeting. I am Nicole Brandon, the Director of the Human Resources Department. Been in that role since December 1st, and it's been interesting, very interesting thus far. I'm looking forward to partaking in this, getting a better understanding of how these decisions are made, and looking forward to working with you again, former Director Christie.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to have you here.
Thank you.
Look forward to your input. Ms. Blevins?
Andy Blevins, City Clerk.
Before we go further, let me first thank all the commission members for our first meeting. I thought it was a lengthy meeting, but nonetheless an extraordinarily productive one. And just wanted to thank you for your input and for your contributions to date. Likewise, all the staff persons who are present that have worked extraordinarily hard to move us forward in our efforts to satisfy all of the requirements of our role as commission members, and to do so in a timely fashion. So thank you for your work thus far. We look forward to working with you for the next several weeks. I think that before we move forward with the minutes, I know that email communications all of us have found email to be obviously very effective and a fairly efficient way to communicate. I don't know that we spent much time, if any, during our last meeting, maybe putting some parameters around email communication in particular, and I thought it would be of value to have City Attorney or Chief Counsel, City Attorney Josh Cox, to maybe share with us a little bit of your insight with regard to communications, particularly as it relates to email, and as we move further down the road and continue to deliberate.
Thank you, Chairman Christie. I don't want to make this too complicated, but just it bears reminding citizen-appointed bodies that, and this particular body is by charter a public body, that when you're a public body, you're subject to the open meetings law, and there are certain restrictions that sort of loggerheads with efficiency when it comes to conducting the business of the commission. And I guess my general guidance is, if it's administrative matters dealing with setting meeting dates and non-substantive issues like that, there's no problem with communication among commission members and staff, and it is much more efficient to have everybody copied on those communications. However, when you get into the substance of what this commission is dealing with, whether it's benchmarks or other substantive matters that touch on the commission's job under the charter, those communications should not be shared among commission members. If you have a particular request of staff, that there's no problem with individual commissioners sending emails to staff. It's the interaction between commissioners. So if it's an email communication, if it's the sort of substantive business that the commission deals with, and you're hitting, reply to all, or you're copying all the commissioners, it's as if you were treated as if you were in the same room, and then that will guide you in terms of whether it's something that should be shared with all commission members in an email. So does that
Most definitely.
Any questions on
Any
that?
questions from of the commissioners? I think it's pretty straightforward, and we will make every effort to ensure that we are in compliance with your directions.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. First matter of business, I'll entertain a motion that I'm assuming first of all that everyone has had an opportunity to review the minutes. I'll entertain a motion that we approve the minutes from our last meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Is there a second? It has been properly moved by Commissioner Member Moore, seconded by Commissioner Member Lee, that we approve the minutes from our previous meeting. Are there any questions, any additions, any corrections? Just for the record, the middle initial, my name is C as opposed to E. Very minor, but appreciated nonetheless. There being no further discussion, all in favor, show by the usual sign of aye.
Aye.
All opposed have the same right, nay. Ayes have it. Minutes are approved unanimously. Obviously, one of the paramount questions that we need to address as a commission is the specific cities that we're going to utilize to do our benchmark. And in order to arrive at what that list looks like, I think it would be of value for Mr. McGinnis at this point to maybe recap for us what has transpired since our last meeting, and that will help us to move toward a final determination.
So, in our last meeting, we had briefly gone over the universe of cities that are out there for us to look at. And what I've put together today in your first list here, it's a paper clipped together here. There's a list of the overall cities to benchmark. So that includes basically all of the rest of the other lists on here. So the next list that you see is the Charter Commission cities. So these are the cities that were specifically outlined within the charter. Then there's Columbus Peer cities. These are cities that our Columbus Human Resources Department uses as peer cities that it looks at when it's looking at salaries. And then there's a Columbus Core Peer city. So these are the cities that are probably most similar to the city of Columbus. And then lastly, this was a great list that Commissioner Easterday had shared with us was Columbus 2020 is one of our main economic development organizations. And there's 16 cities that we routinely look at as our cities that we benchmark with. And so those are those cities. And so if you put all those together, the very first list that you have is that overall benchmarking cities list. Also, in the last meeting, there was a request for a list of all of the right-to-work states. And so that information is in front of you as well. There's currently half of the United States are right-to-work states. And then lastly, Commissioner Murdoch shared a Central Ohio elected officials salaries list, and that could be helpful as well as we begin looking at the issues here. The last thing that you have there is the actual survey that we have out there right now, and we'll wait to the next agenda item to address that. But in our last meeting, the direction from the commission was to pare down the list and look at maybe eliminating, the small cities, eliminating very large cities, but then retaining all the Ohio cities. And so as we, as a staff, went to fulfill your direction, it seemed like there was, it became apparent that there was, we think we needed some further commission input to begin looking at, the cities that we really want to focus on. And so some of the things that, for example, when it became apparent to us was, it's important to benchmark all the cities listed on the Charter Commission report, regardless if they're large or small. It's important to benchmark, Columbus 2020, top 16 competitor cities, regardless if they're large or small. it's important to benchmark all the Ohio cities, even if they're, for instance, Youngstown is on the list and it's a much smaller city than the city of Columbus. So those are just examples of questions, and so that's why, as a staff, we asked for your direction, and it was decided that we would just send out a survey based on the large list that we have on this front page, but that we would come together in the commission meeting here today and potentially look at maybe taking these 44, 45 cities here and maybe paring down that list more. But that's just in a nutshell what we had was the follow-up for the last meeting.
I believe that many of the documents that are here were reviewed and discussed at our first meeting. However, the Columbus 2020 top 16 competitor cities, I don't believe that we had an opportunity. I know you made reference to it, but I don't believe we had an opportunity to actually discuss them. Commission Member Easterday, is there anything in particular that you'd like to share with regard to these cities?
No, I think that Rory did a good job of kind of summarizing. These are the cities that we continually, daily compete with, whether it's to attract and retain talent or to get new business. They are also somewhat similar in population size, and they have other characteristics that are similar. So some cities may have large populations of students similar to our own, things like that. So there are things beyond population that make them ideal, comparable cities that we compare ourselves to on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. Floor is open for discussion with regard to how we go about paring down the group. The list of approximately 45, I believe it is, on the overall benchmarking cities.
Is it 44?
It's 45 is what you see
Okay.
on the list, but I took off Columbus.
Okay.
So it's
Okay.
44.
Good point.
Columbus
Okay.
is still on the list, but I'm not
Yeah.
counting it. So 44, yes.
Okay. Yeah, the floor is open. Any initial thoughts?
For the that have been stated by Commissioner Easterday and also Rory, it seems like that the Columbus 2020 top 16 competitor cities list would be a good starting point for us, perhaps with the exception of New York City and maybe Dallas and Chicago. So that's just what I would offer for purposes of starting the discussion, but certainly open to feedback from other commissioners.
I've got a question, and this is certainly entirely up to the commission, but would it be easier potentially to go through just city by city down this list? Because everyone might have a different idea of what the right city, what is a city we should be focusing on, and for instance, looking at Akron, is that something that the commission, thinks is a city that's viable for us to look at?
Well, first, let's identify which list you're referring to.
Yeah, it's the overall benchmarking cities list. It's the one that lists all of the 44 cities.
Mr. Chair,
Please.
I might suggest you said 44 communities. It might be actually easier to start with a smaller list and then add on. Just to clarify the intent, are we looking to have a reasonable set but not 44, hopefully something less than that? If that's
I would say
helpful?
yes, absolutely. Primarily because realistically getting information that's pertinent to our decision from 44 cities is within the time frame that we're working with. It's highly unlikely, if not impossible. So we definitely want to peer down that list.
So I might offer up then, in follow-up to Commissioner Tyler Lee's comments, if we wanted to start with the 16 competitor cities less the 3, and then add on to that, that might be an easier way to go through it, just for consideration.
Absolutely. Is everyone comfortable with that approach?
Yes.
Very good.
I do have a different thought. or
By all means,
suggestion.
please.
For consistency's sake, since the city of Columbus already utilizes the Columbus Peer Cities list, I imagine there's been some analysis of why the city believes this is a good list when looking to benchmark salaries of current employees. It would just seem to me to be consistent to maybe utilize the list that is already utilized by the city for the same purpose that we are convened for.
Franklin?
Yes, Commissioner, and if I may remind the commission, that list of peer cities has been established over a number of years, mostly for collective bargaining purposes, not necessarily with the same union every time. We have 6 different unions with whom we bargain, collectively bargain. But over the years, the list is added up, and that's what we end up with.
But this, I misunderstood. I thought that this was used for benchmarking salaries of administrative employees.
It is.
That-
It is.
Okay,
It
so
is,
not just
yes.
representative, but administrative as well.
Yes, and I was providing the reason as to how that list came to be. Now, the core peer cities list is an even closer version of those cities that are closer to us in terms of demographics, population, education levels, things like that, that we've established that when I go out to do salary surveys on 1, 2, 3 different jobs, we'll ask those first.
Thank you for the clarification.
You're welcome.
To chime in, but this maybe gets us to the exact point of where Rory and I decided we need to go back to the commission. So when you look at those core peer cities, and we were looking at reducing them, when you started picking cities off, the challenge arises when you're comparing a classified employee performing a certain type of task and an elected official, in the sense that you can make an argument that a sanitation worker in Cincinnati and a sanitation worker in the city of Columbus is relatively the same. And that regional closeness and the cities being in Ohio probably matters more there. But when you spread out to an elected official and you look up the structure of the government, the number of council members they have, the size of the population, and now a city that's 3 times the size of Cincinnati with a different government structure, without even a true distinction of a strong mayor, and all those classifications, it then gets more muddy and not quite as clear as to whether those core peer cities, which for the purposes of comparing a classified employee in one city versus another, is a really good comparison between an elected official in one city and another. And that's when we decided that you could probably make a good rationale case for lots of different cities, and it's not Rory and I's decision to be making those judgments, but really the commission's decision to be making those judgments. In addition, looking at some Ohio cities that might be included, even looking at things like population trend. For instance, Columbus is a city that's growing in the state of Ohio, and it might be a better comparison to other larger cities who are also growing versus smaller Ohio cities who are declining in population. Because part of the challenge is not just considering the recommendations that you'll have to make for the purposes of this commission, but understanding you're sort of setting the path for future commissions to come and setting a base level that 4 years from now, another commission will come back and say, well, what did the commission do in 2015? And what has changed since then? So looking at other Ohio cities that have lost population over the past 10 years versus where we're projecting Columbus to go over the next 4 to 50 years. And Mr. Murdoch, you know very full well of your work at Morpsey of where Columbus is sort of going. So again, that sort of further muddied the waters, and why we decided it is probably better to have this kind of discussion amongst ourselves and really amongst the commissioners, and talk through some of those issues and probably others that will come up in the course of the conversation.
The list of Columbus peer cities, not the list of core peer, but the list of peer cities, appears to be somewhat of a compromise. It's not as extensive as the list of 44, but it also is not as small a list as the core peer list. It includes a few cities that are beyond the 2020 list, So that may be a bit more, it may be that we can work from the Columbus peer list, and if necessary, add to or delete from. And that may serve as a fairly decent compromise or a decent starting point. Again, going through the 44, I don't object to it. It's just, I think that I'm not sure that there are many cities on this list of 44 that would not appear on the Columbus peer cities list that we would necessarily want to include. So I'm comfortable with starting at either point, but I do think it's a good idea to go through the list in its entirety and through at least the peer cities list. And then from that, we'll be able to narrow some down.
I think, Greg, you might have informed this also. I think that there were a couple of cities that were on the 2020 list that weren't on the peer cities list.
Yes.
Only a couple,
There were
right?
three,
Three?
and they were added to that overall benchmarking of
Yeah.
the cities. They were
Lexington,
Lexington,
Minneapolis,
and
Yeah.
Raleigh, North Carolina. That's right.
So
Okay.
maybe to your point of looking at that compromise, then zeroing in on those three cities would be whether we add them to that pure cities list.
What's your thoughts, Mr.
I think that's a good idea, Mr. Chairman. I just did a quick count here. The Columbus peer cities is 31 in the reduction of, if you're looking at the 44 overall. But yes, certainly, I think, I guess I agree with what you were saying, so I don't have anything to add to that. I'm sorry.
That's fine. So what we're looking at essentially is the Columbus peer cities list with the addition of 3 cities that came from the 2020 list, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
I actually think there are a few more cities on the Columbus 2020 that aren't on the peer cities.
Okay.
There are, but referring back to Commissioner John Hartley's suggestion of eliminating New York City, for instance, I don't believe Chicago's on here, but Dallas does remain on the Columbus Peer City list.
Okay, let's do this in the interest of time. Let's walk through the Columbus peer cities list. It's a bit, let's walk through that list, and then to the extent it's necessary to delete from or add to, so that we are ensuring that we've covered all of the 2020 cities that we absolutely want to include. At least it gets us a starting point, and we can walk through the cities. All right? Well, but before going further, have we decided that we do want to include all of the Ohio cities? I've listened to some of Ken's comments, and they're very legitimate points. There may be some Ohio cities here that are truly not comparable. But if there's some legitimate rationale for including all of the Ohio cities, we can just make that assumption that any Ohio city that's listed on this peer list is included.
Mr. Chairman, what Mr. Paul said, those were some very good points. The one that we do not normally regularly communicate with is Youngstown, just because it is so much smaller. I don't believe their population is over, here it is, yeah, 65,000. Other than that, those 5 cities, Akron, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Dayton, and Toledo, I would recommend that they do remain on the list.
Right, sounds good. Well, let's start with that list and walk through each of the cities. I'm sorry. So, if there are any objections to including a city as we get to each one of them, please just note that for the record and stop and discuss. All right, start with Akron is in, Albuquerque, New Mexico, Atlanta, Austin, Baltimore, Boston, Charlotte, Mecklenburg, Cincinnati? Before I move further, I'm taking silence as a yes, unless I hear to the contrary. Okay.
Mr. Chair, that,
Yes, sir.
Just with some of these cities, and I think Boston might be one of them, the cost of living is significantly higher than here. So we might, if we're looking for a way to pare down the list, we might consider taking Boston off the list.
Okay. So noted for, we'll come back and discuss this, but let's note that Boston is one we may want to consider removing. Okay. Charlotte, Mecklenburg, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Dallas. Questions about Dallas? Okay. Dayton, Denver, Detroit, El Paso, Texas, Fort Worth, Texas, Indianapolis, Marion County, Jacksonville, Duval County, Kansas City, Louisville, Jefferson County, Memphis, Milwaukee, Nashville and Davidson County, Oklahoma City, Pittsburgh, San Antonio, San Diego, San Francisco, Seattle, St. Louis, Toledo. Before we discuss Boston, any additions that anyone would like to include?
I would suggest Lexington, Minneapolis, and Raleigh. Those were the three that remained on the 2020 list that did not appear on this Columbus Peer Cities list. There were some concerns about the other two that were on the list, Chicago and New York, maybe not being quite comparable. So I would just recommend at least those three cities, if not all five.
Okay. Any concerns about San Diego? If we consider Boston to be one of the cities where the cost of living is significantly higher, I would imagine that the two California cities that are listed here, particularly San Diego, and I wonder about either Dallas or San Antonio, both of which have populations closer to 1.3 or 1.4 million. Not that the population in and of itself is the only factor, but if we're looking at true comparisons, I think all of the other ones, legitimate arguments can be made for them, but I'm comfortable with including them if the commission would prefer that we leave those cities in. Any discussion on that?
I'm supportive of removing San Francisco, San Diego, and Dallas for the reasons you stated.
Any other thoughts?
One thought, Mr. Chair.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Just
sir.
to frame the conversation too, it's not good or bad or indifferent really. But in looking at some of the reports other cities with commissions did, an interesting, I'll be leaning on Mr. Beaverson if we go this direction, but they did a calculation where they broke down in real dollars versus comparison cities, doing two different things. One, calculating cost of living or trying to factor that in, but then also with population is concerned, the number of council members as a ratio to the number of people to figure out sort of per person in your city how much a council member or an elected official was being paid. Conversely, you can work the formula backwards and see what that person would be paid in Columbus if they were being paid what they were making in San Diego, for instance. It's not going to be a perfect comparison, but I just throw that out there that, and I don't know if it's a good direction to go, but it was an interesting thing that we came across in looking at other reports of sort of mathematical ways of trying to make apples to apples comparisons between cities who, to Commissioner Murdoch's point, in ways other than population or size are really kind of different from each other. And certainly your points about Dallas or Boston or San Diego, there are certainly differences beyond even population there.
Appreciate that perspective. to the other commissioners. So looks like we're getting very close. Are we including or excluding the city's reference, specifically Boston, Dallas, San Diego, and San Francisco? Is there a strong feeling one way or the other?
I'm fine with removal.
Mr. Chair, I'm comfortable with if it's assistive to staff and having a smaller list, I think it
Right.
makes sense to me.
Very good. And the additions being Lexington, Minneapolis, and Raleigh. So that we can ensure that if we entertain a motion to that effect, that we're on the same page in terms of which cities. Even before doing that, one more question. From your perspective, and I know it's impossible to predict to any particular degree of certainty, given the list that we've at least contemplated at this point, how realistic is it that you're likely to get adequate responses within the time frame that we're dealing with?
It's, and I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, it's hard to answer at this point. I can tell you that the response, the survey's already been sent out.
Okay.
The response that we've gotten thus far, we actually have 4 cities that have already responded. The sense that I'm getting, especially with the speed, to which they did that, is that it's a fairly simple survey. It's certainly comprehensive, but the people I'm sending this to are experts in their fields. They have that information readily available, and they're able to pull it up and do it. Now, that discounts, though, the other side of it, which is somebody in another city, they're very busy, they've got lots of things to do. This survey comes in from Columbus, Ohio, and you look at it and, well, that is something that I could get to, or maybe not, and that's the risk that we run. And certainly there are follow-up calls and email that we can make to do that. But I would say, just based on the feedback I've gotten so far, is that I think we would be likely to have a good percentage return rate on this survey. But again, that's only after 2 days of having it out there. So I hope that helps, Mr. Chairman.
It does. Thank you.
So who received it, the 44?
Yes, that's correct.
And, I'm sorry.
Just as a follow-up, so we spent the time narrowing down just so you know which cities to follow up with? Or if it had already been sent, I guess, why did we go through the exercise of narrowing down?
As everyone knows, we're on a tight time frame in terms of getting the information in order to be able to make a recommendation on this. In the interest of time, and without having a commission being able to determine where do we really want to focus our efforts, the idea was to send out to the whole list. If we get information back from those cities, great. But what we really wanted was to, which I believe we have those core cities that we want to focus on, that if we need to do follow-ups and as we move forward, that these are the cities that we're really going to focus on in terms of helping to get to the decision that we get to. So for instance, I think Youngstown may have already responded.
Yes.
That's certainly information that the commission can take into account. It might be helpful. But in terms of just trying to add some focus as to what are the cities that are most like the city of Columbus, that make the most sense in determining the decision that the commission is going to need to make. That was the reason for it.
And Commissioner, if I may, there's another factor involved in this too, is time for analysis of it. So the information that we want to be able to provide to you in a timely manner, that analysis takes time, and that will be another question for a future commission meeting. Is now that we have this data, how would you like to see it, and in what different ways can we present that to you?
Well, let me try to frame a request for a motion, and we can have discussion if necessary beyond that. I would, at this time, entertain a motion, but the cities being utilized for purposes of this comparison would include the Columbus peer cities that are listed minus the cities of Boston, Dallas, San Diego, and San Francisco, but also including the cities of Lexington, Minneapolis, and Raleigh.
So moved.
Is there a second? It's been properly moved by Commission Member Moore, seconded by Commission Member Tyler Lee, that the cities listed on the Columbus Peer Cities list, with the exceptions of Boston, Dallas, San Diego, and San Francisco, but with the addition of Lexington, Minneapolis, and Raleigh, be accepted as the cities that the staff will work on or will focus on for benchmarking purposes. Are there any questions on the motion? All in favor may show by the usual sign of aye.
Aye.
There are none opposed. Ayes have it. The motion passes. All right. Thank you for walking us through that and assisting us in reaching our benchmark list. All righty. Rory referenced earlier that we were going to address the survey as our next agenda item. Mr. Beaverson, if you can kind of walk us through the content of the survey and what exactly has been done and what we intend on doing going forward.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The survey copies that you have there in front of you, this is the actual spreadsheet that went out to the cities. As with anything, we're always, our highest interest is that first perception. How big that survey seems, how small, how easy it seems to those receiving it. We took all of the questions that the commission agreed upon in the first meeting, and we created this in a way that I hope is easy enough for the respondents to go through. You see there on the first page, and well, I'm not referring to the first page with the information on it, but the first page that says all elected officials. You can see there where what we try to do is take those questions that really applies to the whole city or all of the elected officials and break them down in a simple and concise manner for our respondents to answer. And Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you want me to, would you like me to go through each one of these or
I would, more than anything else, I want to make sure that the questions that we decided during our last meeting were pertinent are in fact covered here, or if there have been any additions to those or any other changes.
No, sir. Everything that the commission decided in the first meeting is what you see right here. The difference is maybe the way it was asked. Mm-hmm. So I'll give you an example. Sure. The term limits question was it formally applied to every elected official. So if you scroll through here, there was a question about term limits for your auditor, your attorney, and so on. Well, what we did is, again, to make it concise, we put it on this first page, and it's the last question there. Do your elected officials have term limits? And if so, please describe them individually. So that was a way to pare it down to ask the same question about everything. And so far, the response that I've gotten, if there is a term limit, it's really only the mayor or a council member. The auditor and attorney equivalents do not have term limits. But again, that's with 4 responses back. And so that's what we tried to do with all of these. On the next page, just for another example, the mayor, one question that we asked again for every elected official was, do you have an elected mayor, in this case, or an appointed mayor? I think that applies more with the city attorney and the city auditor, but in some cases that could be true. Well, what we did is we took that out as a question altogether and put it up at the top and I'll just read this, if I may, Mr. Chairman, for the record. This survey assumes your mayor is elected. If the office is appointed, please make note of it in the notes column. And we have a notes column for each one of these. And then we repeated the same thing for the attorney, the auditor, and the council members. So again, what you see here is a list, a full list of the questions that you approved in the first meeting, just kind of rearranged in a way that we can make it more palatable to anyone completing the survey.
And this survey has already gone out.
Yes, sir, it has. It went out Tuesday morning. Was it Tuesday?
Any
Yesterday?
concerns, issues, questions from any of the commission members? Okay, very good. This appears to be comprehensive and includes all the recommendations that were made by the commission. We need to, well, the fact that it's already gone out, I don't believe there's a necessity for us to agree or for there to be a formal motion to that effect. I think the discussion that's been held here is more than sufficient. And we should proceed with questions as they have already been submitted. So I look forward to the responses.
So, Chair, if I may,
Please.
one thing that we might want to ask the commission here for their decision on this is, as Greg is getting the responses from cities, how often does the commission want to wait till we have all the responses to receive anything, or does the commission want to, maybe once a week receive that information?
Very good. Thoughts, commission members?
I'd like to get them a few days before the next meeting to have time to prepare, but I don't want to, I would prefer to not have them trailing through several emails because I'm afraid they may get lost. So
Gotcha.
maybe three days before the next meeting, whatever is in at that time, I'd like to see them.
Is that reasonable?
Yes.
3 days it is. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just to raise, not really a concern, but just, I guess, to a point, is that as the information comes in, it essentially comes in, in answers in each of these cells.
Right.
What I would normally do when all of it's put together is I wouldn't necessarily present it back to you in that form. However, there may not be a sufficient enough amount of time to make those changes before sending it out to you before the next commission meeting. So I maybe just a point of clarification. Would you like to see it as it comes back to me
I guess
in
the
this
question for
form?
us would be, how would you be reformatting it?
For example, a city might write a lot in a cell or in several cells where they're getting very specific about their answer. Some of these aren't just yes or no answers, and what I would do is I would go through and I guess pare that down. And 1 or 2 or 3, that won't be an issue, but if we get 20 responses between now and the next meeting, I'm just thinking in the interest of time to assist you.
Voluminous though it may be, I think the responses that we get, rather than in any way being accused of editing them, it probably would be best that we receive the responses as they're brought to you. Other thoughts? I mean,
Excuse me, Chair.
By
if I
all
may,
means.
Again, for the sake of time and additional clarity, do you all only want to receive the responses that come back that are on that list? Because we know we've sent out a larger net, we've sent it out to all 44.
right.
For example, he has Youngstown. Do you want that? Or do
No.
you just want Greg to send you the
I
ones
believe
that we've identified on the list?
I appreciate the
only?
clarification. We're just looking at the list that we've decided on today.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Hopefully that will help to reduce the volume of information that you're sharing with the commission members.
just add, I appreciate your thoughtfulness. So, but I also agree with Chair Christie that if you could send them to us as you receive them 3 days in advance, and if you have time to prepare it in a more succinct spreadsheet, so that would help facilitate dialogue by the day of the board meeting, that would be great.
Thank you.
If time permits. Yes, that would be helpful.
And I hope it didn't, I hope I wasn't misstating what I was,
Absolutely.
that's exactly what, for your benefit to,
That
so
was
you're
very
not
clear.
reading through.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Do we anticipate having conversation about the responses that we've received before they all come in? Because I see that our next meeting is before the response due date. So do we anticipate at meeting number 3 beginning to have conversation about that data, or are we waiting for it to all come in before we start to have conversation about it? And maybe that's not been determined yet.
What I'd suggest is the timeline is a little bit later in the agenda, and maybe we talk about, our next meeting when we get to that point. But that's a very good question in terms of, from the commission standpoint, is, do we want to wait until the 10th when the deadline is, or do we want to meet before then? But we'll get to that in the agenda.
Very good. Anything further with regard to the SERP? Mr. Paul, I understand that you have a couple of ideas for future topics or presentations to the commission.
That sounds like a troubling introduction. Well, I have one specifically, and it came about in looking at your charge again, and regardless of the information that comes in, the analysis that will obviously have to occur, decisions that will eventually have to be made in terms of setting a base pay for which members in which years, that's all complex. We'll get there, and we'll work through that. But one of the aspects of your charge was, aside from the base pay, was setting the annual increase of any base pay for the out years. Just to rehash, I think the original Charter Review Commission's idea was that you'd set that base pay and have 3 years of cost of living increases in between the meetings of the Citizens Commission on elected official compensation. And it specifically stated in the charter that be tied to the consumer price index, and it should be more specific, the average increase in the consumer price index of the preceding 4 years. So I did a little research to figure out what that was and what that would be, and I think I know about what that would be in this moment of time, but for the purposes of this commission, it would probably be good for somebody who is a bit more of an authority on that than myself to actually be able to discuss what the consumer price index is, how that might be used in other discussions in terms of, how Greg might use it to help advise Director Brandon and negotiating labor contracts, or how that might come into the play of this discussion here, with the hopes of perhaps getting to a finite number, because that's going to be a formulaic number based on Federal Bureau of Labor statistics that we can come to an agreement with, that if we happen to know what that number is in advance, it may even actually help inform the ultimate base pay, in the sense that your decisions are going to have to be not only just a base pay for 1 year in specific, but understand that base pay is only going to grow so much for another 4 years. And to be frank, the consumer price index is a little bit different than what we might consider a cost of living increase that we might see in even the private sector. So the idea was, staff gets together, figure out who those experts are or expert is to guide a discussion, and especially for the public at large who might be watching this or be curious, where do they get that number from, to have some basis of helping that discussion in the future. And it is something that's independent of the responses that we're receiving and independent of any of the research we're doing. It's a fairly finite number that we could get to. So that was a
It's an
specific
excellent
idea
thought.
as a future topic.
It's an excellent thought, and one that I think would be very valuable for ultimately for our discussion and our deliberation, and ultimately for the recommendation. So, by all means. Along those lines, before we move further,
Sure.
Mr. Beaverson, are you aware of persons who may be affiliated? But you can discuss the details of this with your staff. But the persons who may be affiliated with World at Work, which is one of the organizations that I know that you deal with fairly regularly, I would hope that there would be individuals who are either affiliated with the organization or who may have presented to the organization in the past that would be considered experts or fairly learned on the adjustments that are done through the CPI and so forth. It's just one more source potentially.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chairman, that is certainly a question I can ask. World at Work is there are people and there are resources there that would have a lot of information on CPI and other similar things. So certainly I'd be glad to ask.
Great. Whatever sources staff that are working on this determine to be appropriate, you can make that determination. We're open to whatever it is that you bring to the table.
Great.
It's a great suggestion. We appreciate that.
And part of the reason why that topic's on our agenda today, of other issues, which we'll get to the timeline here in a moment. We obviously want to make the most use of your time, and when we're getting together to make sure that we're making decisions and moving the ball down the field, and that was one specific way where we might be able to check off a couple questions we'll have later. But then to ask all of you whether or not there are other questions or topics that we could be discussing to fill out those meetings. Or the next future meeting, in addition to any research we might get back in. So I'd open the floor there for any future topics you'd like to add.
Any thoughts from commission members in terms of other topics? I'm sure that there are things that may come to mind as we begin to
And if
receive
not,
the data.
certainly you can forward those in between the meetings. But okay.
I did note that the website is now up and functional. Can you share a little bit more about that with us, Ken, please?
Yes. If you bear with me 1 second, I'll even have a visual aid.
Okay.
Not quite what I was hoping for. But sent out yesterday evening. We went live. I'd wanted to do it within a week of our last meeting, but it took us 13 days. But technology is sometimes challenging. But we got it up thanks to the clerk's office, who was a huge help. The website, just for folks who might be listening to this at home, is columbus.gov/compensation commission. If you go to the city's homepage and go to council, on the left-hand side, there'll be a navigation bar, and it'll also appear on that left-hand navigation bar. My guess is if you do a search, you'd be able to find it also. I won't belabor it, and you're not going to be able to see it that well here, but if you go to the site, you will be able to see an introductory statement that sort of, in a nutshell, provides the mission. Underneath that, information on the commissioners, the charge that you were given, who each of you are. Addition underneath that is news, which is the original press release sort of that went out that announced the commission that has even more information in it. But also, it'll serve as a gathering spot for news articles that appear on your work. Sometimes there's the question of, does anybody know this? Has this been reported on? Is anybody paying attention? And we can use this particular spot on the website to gather those news articles, both for your benefit, but for the public's benefit, to be able to see what's been written about it to this point. Underneath there is meeting materials, which will probably be the most useful part. may actually be useful for all of you if you're traveling about and want to go see some of the materials and you don't have your handy dandy binders with you. But every piece of paper that was given to you last week was scanned in proper order and indexed just as it appears in your binder, and appears as one single link under this. And for each meeting moving forward, it'll be meeting 1, meeting 2 with the date. It'll be organized just as you receive it, including the information that we received today. And the meeting minutes will also appear there after they've been approved by the commission. Minutes from the first meeting aren't up yet, but they will be after today's meeting, because we wanted you to make sure that we got your name correct, for instance. So once those corrections are made, we'll put them up on the website. Meeting videos may or may not be good for the public at large or your viewing. I don't particularly like to see myself on television, but for those wanting to know what actually happened inside this room on that date, the video will be there. So folks can watch it at their leisure and rewatch it as many times as they like, to pause, to slow-mo, to go through, what did he just say? And play it back. It'll all be there each meeting, thanks to our fine CTV staff. And then also of great value, I think, to the public and to commissioners to know that we've asked the question and are hopefully getting some sort of response and feedback from the public at large. There's a public comment section, which when you click on it, will bring up a web form. That in that form, you can, by simply putting your name and your email address, forward any comments that you might have, and hit submit, and it goes straight to several staff people, so there's no question of one single staff person missing a response coming through. It'll go to multiple staff members. And in addition, if people suspect that it's not really going to the commission, there's an email address where they could duplicate that message, and if they happened to have an attachment that they want to include, they can send that to the email address, which is commission@columbus.gov. So hopefully we're providing ample ways for the public, for you, to get the information that's being presented quickly. And actually, now that the website is up and running and live, it's actually pretty easy from this point forward to continue to populate it, but to also get information to us as staff and to you as commissioners, a two-way communication there. So again, the address is columbus.gov/compensation commission, and searchable on the site columbus.gov. And if there's anything missing or you think we should be adding, please do let us know. It does follow the template that we set up for the Columbus Charter Review Commission. And hopefully it will work and suit your needs.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry if I may. Is there a mechanism for citizens who may not have computer access or may not be computer savvy to get the materials or to submit comments?
You know, that's a very good point, and there will be, is the answer to your question. So under the general mission and charge, there was a general statement of how to get in touch with staff. That could be more specific and a simple phone number. But the fact that it's housed on the city's website and there are other general contact numbers for council and for the clerk, certainly someone could find a way to get to us, but we should make that more clear. And that's just simple of adding a phone number, and we'll do that. So, point well taken. It was actually something that we did do for the Charter Review Commission that was omitted here, but now I know why we did it for the Charter Review Commission.
And then maybe we'll also have a mailing address that we add in there as well.
Sure, doesn't hurt. Does not hurt.
And perhaps we could make it a point at our meetings to articulate that
Yeah.
going forward as another way to get the information out to people who might be viewing us.
In promoting this also, I think in logical progression, once we get to the next meeting, what we want to discuss there and when we might be announcing that, the goal was to use through our traditional communication means, social media, email blast, in tandem with the announcement of the next meeting, also draw attention to this site. We may actually do that prior to sending out that notice. It just depends on how quickly our next meeting is going to be. but certainly in the context of that release, draw attention to the website, phone number, address, different ways people can get a hold of us, and put that on our social media also. Great.
Thank you for your suggestion as well. That's excellent. All right. We've been discussing next dates, and I think we're there in terms of trying to determine what makes sense in terms of our next meeting. And I think as part of that discussion, we should revisit the discussion of when it's appropriate to schedule a public hearing. I'm not sure that enough has changed, frankly, from our initial discussion to essentially for us to have enough information to truly make a public hearing something of value. I'm not sure we're quite there yet, but we'll certainly keep the topic open for additional input and suggestions by the commission members. The original proposed timeline, as we reviewed last meeting, suggested that our next meeting would occur during the week of April the 6th. The surveys, the deadline for those responses is not until April 10th, correct?
Yes, sir. Friday, April 10th.
So if in fact we were to meet that week, you'd be looking at getting responses back to us somewhere between as early as maybe Friday, April 3rd, or earlier that week if the meeting would be as late as the 10th. Do we think, first of all, that the meeting on the week of the 6th is of value? Is it realistic that we will have enough information to really have sufficient topics for the meeting on the 6th if we are sending the survey out? If we just send it out, and I'm not sure we're going to get enough feedback or responses to really have a sufficient amount of information to merit a meeting the week of the 6th, but it's impossible to really know that.
It really is, Mr. Chairman. It's hard to tell at this point. That is maybe something we could give you an update on between now and then.
Okay, that's fine. I think we want to the extent we can do so today, to set a date. And if there's a need for an adjustment, we can do so. It probably would be best, in order to stay on schedule, that we establish a date. We are required to have a recommendation. The target was the 24th of April, and that's right around the corner. So I'm open to thoughts, suggestions about the meeting date. What are the things we may be able to include on an agenda if we were to meet the week of April the 6th, et cetera.
To Mr. Beaverson's point earlier, and that's just something to contemplate, it's really the analysis of that data. We know we'll have more information than we have today. There's a decent chance we'll have a decent amount of information that, at least in its raw form, could be shared and possibly coupled with the discussion of CPI might be a worthwhile reason to get together. The flip side is, if you'd like to have everything back and any amount of analysis done, delaying might be worthwhile to you. I should note, it didn't really follow into the agenda here, but it was a question posed by commissioners at our last meeting. Are there other organizations that we're reaching out to try and glean some of the information? We have reached out and have gotten some additional data, including some that Rory mentioned. Morpsey was good enough to share Central Ohio data. We also received just today, just earlier, I've not been able to look at it, and I don't want to speak to it definitively or that it would even end up in the final analysis, but the Ohio Municipal League did do a salary survey of Ohio cities, some of which you have included today in those finals, so we'll have to look at that. That may be helpful. Certainly as a second source, maybe even confirming some of this, or as a starting point to look at some of these cities. And we continue to call our friends at the National League of Cities and U.S. Conference of Mayors, to whom we pay membership dues, seeking a response from them. Our staff is hounding them, and I'm hounding our staff. But that may help get the discussion further along too. But to Mr. Beaverson's point, at this point, it's hard to tell exactly what we'll have, but there's a fair idea that we'll probably have a decent amount of data, at least by the latter portion of that week that we discussed.
And if I could just throw this out too, that when we send out a salary survey and we put a deadline on it, we don't always get the information by the deadline.
Yeah.
So that's something to consider too. We often get information, but it's a few days, a week later, and so on. So might be something important to consider for future meetings as well.
Mr. Chair, if we're contemplating a presentation on the CPI, we're trying to meet every 2 weeks, perhaps we would do that in 2 weeks, and then if the next meeting's 2 weeks after that, that would give sufficient time for responses and analysis. Just a thought.
I agree. In addition, there may be an opportunity to review some of the information that's been received from many of the sources that Ken has referenced here, if that information is received between now and the week of the 10th. But I agree. It seems as though there's, in order for us to come even remotely close to meeting the suggested deadline, we need to stay the course. Availability. Let's first look at availability, then we can talk about specific agenda items. The week of April the 6th, is there a date during that week that's problematic, or?
We're looking for the 4 o'clock hour.
I don't know that we're wedded to that time frame. If it works best for everyone to look at 4, then if that works for everyone's schedule, sure.
That's a tough week for me, but I'll adjust as needed.
Is there a day that's better than any of the others? Not really.
No, we're in performance review time that week, so I've got meetings all over the place. But I can make some movement, so whatever works for commissioners.
Mr. Chair, Wednesday is a good day. Thursday is a bad day for me and Mr. McGinnis because the MORPC commission meeting is that day.
Wednesday, April the 8th.
Is it Wednesday night or Thursday?
Wednesday's good. Thursday afternoon is not
It's
good.
not good. It's Wednesday afternoon, the 8th at 4. Work for everyone else? Well, let's look at establishing Wednesday, the 8th of April at 4 o'clock p.m. The date for our next meeting. And suggested agenda items. Obviously, any of the information that we're able to get back at that point, we'll be in a position to both receive, and the commission can determine at what point the extent to which we'll go through any thorough review and analysis. But certainly review that information, as well as if we can schedule a presentation regarding the CPI between now and then, it seems very appropriate. And you also made reference to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, the National League of Cities, et cetera. And if there's specific information that's come back from them, maybe a good time to take a look at that information as well. Any other specific thoughts about agenda items that we've not referenced previously?
The only thought I was thinking of on this Columbus Pure Cities list, there are a couple of cities that are marked by 2 asterisks, which have compensation commissions. And just wanted to discuss the wisdom of maybe having a presentation when one of the Ohio cities come in And maybe they could share lessons learned, so when our data comes
That's a great
in,
point.
we'll be ready to evaluate it. And I thought that because Dayton has one, and that's, an hour down the road. There may be some value, or even in staff, just reaching out to them and reporting back some lessons learned, or having them come down if they were interested, just in trying to fill the next meeting, so that, again, when the data come in, we're ready to move forward expeditiously.
It's a great thought. And you can let us know the extent to which that's possible, maybe a few days in advance. But to the extent that that can be included in the next agenda, that would be wonderful. Other thoughts, ideas about the agenda? I think that based on what we've discussed here, that sounds like it would be a relatively full agenda. So, from there. All right, just
Can I share one other idea?
By
Is
all
there
means.
any information that might be valuable historically as to how the compensation has been set? Again, historically, we got a chart of what the salaries what the salaries were over the past couple of years. But is there any value to walking us through what was considered during that time, or maybe there isn't? I don't know what the process was.
I can speak from my own experience, but it's rather short, even though I've been here for 8 fun years. I think there's a certain amount of research that went into previous decisions. I'm not exactly sure the extent of which or how formalized it was, which quite honestly is part of the reason why we came to this point. That reasonable people may be able to do research and come to a common agreement of what might be an appropriate increase in salary over time. And certainly there's probably some sort of data out there that we could dig into and find. But there wasn't a formalized process. Ultimately, it was the vote of council, which still must occur, but we're pairing it up with a more formalized process this time. Going out and seeing what those other cities have done, which we've started to do but have not had great success just yet, is something we should continue to do. And certainly I think with the help of our HR department can go back and look and see what data might exist that we used to sort of hang our hat on, so to speak, in making recommendations in previous years.
Only if it's useful.
Yeah. I guess just while we're thinking about future ideas, and I'm not sure that it would be good whether we would have enough information or whether it's an appropriate time at our next meeting to discuss it, but maybe just bring it back up as a reminder of it's a discussion that will have to be had at some point in time that is really separate from a base dollar amount for any given elected official. It's determining which years the commission might want to make recommendations for and making decisions in terms of whether or not the commission wants to recommend changing rates that are currently set or what years looking forward we want to make recommendations for. I say it may not be appropriate for the next decision because that may depend on what comes back from our peer cities and sort of the context in which you're making that decision. If it comes back that the salaries that are already set are largely in line with peer cities, maybe we don't want to change what's on the books. If it comes back that folks aren't in line with what's in peer cities, maybe we do want to make adjustments. But maybe we have to wait a second. I just think that it probably is at some point in time a topic for discussion that may or may not be contingent upon whatever the base rate might be or whatever that context might be. So tuck that in the back of your heads, I guess.
Will do. Before we adjourn, I just want to make sure that there are no additional questions that staff would have of us. Are we clear on the expectations and next steps in terms of gathering the data? And
Yes, sir,
ensuring
from my
that's clear?
perspective, yes.
Are there any other questions that anyone would have that may be unanswered at this point? Okay. Any questions or any additional comments, concerns, anything from commission members? Okay. We look forward to seeing everyone on Wednesday, April the 8th at 4 o'clock p.m. Meeting 2 of the commission is hereby adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.